Good. Well, welcome everybody, and it's just good afternoon. Good afternoon. I think everybody's in our same time zone. We've got nobody from Canada. Fintan's here with us. Well, welcome to this webinar on organizational culture, which of course follows on from the publication that was out in our reflection series just recently on being intentional about culture. It matters. And of course, we do know that culture does matter. Culture is all about the way in which we relate to one another, about the way that we do things around here, about what's seen and displayed in our behaviors, in our statements, in our ideas, in our even the way we organize our offices and our branches. Our culture is felt and seen. And also it's based, of course, on our principles and values, our cooperative principles and values. And it, of course, characterizes our credit union difference. And so that's why we were really pleased that Fintan came along and said, I could write you a paper on culture. We thought, well, that's great, because it's so much part of what we talk about, but exploring it in some kind of detail, both theoretically and practically, is sometimes something we don't always do. So I'm really glad to welcome and present Fintan here with us today. I'll spotlight him in a minute so everybody can see him in full view. Fintan, of course, has got a long experience in credit unions, both in Ireland and in Canada, where he's been CEO in both places. And now he's an organizational consultant for the credit union sector. Just a little bit about organization today, very quickly. This event is participative, so it's not just listening, it's about engagement and sharing ideas. So we will have a breakout session where people will be able to respond to a number of questions that Fintan sets us. And will be a little bit of time for feedback after that as well. So we'll have a debate and a discussion as part of this session. It is being recorded so that our members will be able to follow this, online later on. I think everybody was informed about that before we took part, before coming on. We're going on. We've a hard stop at 1:30, so we'll see how we go on in terms of time. But just to people have got other things to do, we will have an absolute hard stop at 1:30. I think that's everything. Nick, have I forgotten? I always forget something. It's maybe I should have introduced. I think I was just assuming everybody here knows who I am on Swoboda Centre, because I think everybody here is our members. So I didn't really introduce myself. I'm going to pass over to Fintan in a second, but I'll just check out with Nick first. Is there anything I've forgotten?
Only to say that the recording won't record the small groups. So when you're in the breakout groups, there's no recording of those.
Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to pass over now to Fintan. If you 1 second, Fintan, so that everybody can see you on Spotlight in full screen. Here you go. There you go. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks for the introduction. Just again to introduce myself, for a lot of the people on the call, there's no need for introduction, I think, but just for people who don't know me or my background, I joined the credit union movement in Ireland in 1989. Became manager of Cushona Credit Union in Askeaton, a small village in West Limerick. I moved from there. I was there for 14 years, moved from there to Tralee Credit Union, which is now Cara Credit Union in North Kerry. And I was there as their CEO for 14 years as well. So in 2017, I moved to Saskatchewan, Canada, and took over as CEO in Plainsview Credit Union there. So again, credit union, not a huge credit union. It's almost the same size as the credit union I left in Tralee, but obviously a very different system. Ethos, values, all the same, but the services very different than what we would recognize as credit union services here in Ireland, because they've got a lot of commercial lending, a lot of mortgages. So yeah, quite different. And that credit union merged with two others in 2021. And that credit union cornerstone is now almost 2 billion in assets, which to us sounds massive, but in reality, in credit union land Canada, it's the lower size of mid. So a mid-sized credit union in Canada is about 2 to 6 billion. The larger ones are up to 30 billion. The smaller ones are below 2 billion, below a million mark, really, I suppose. So that's it. So when I left the credit union system in 2021, I did a executive coaching course through Royal Roads University. And through that, I've also learned about culture. And I suppose really I've learned about culture over my 30 years working in credit unions and in other organizations as well. And I took a real interest in it. As I left, I took an interest in it, which people would say maybe I should have taken an interest in culture when I was there. But I think, the experience of it stood to me. So when I got the opportunity at the end of last year to write a paper on culture, I've been doing that with credit unions for the last 2 years, I took the opportunity. So that's me. I live in Calgary, Canada. I'm home in Limerick this week. Well, this for the last 3 weeks. And I've been working with credit unions here in Ireland, doing culture workshops. Really appreciate the opportunity to do it. And it's been great fun. So that's what I do. That's a lot of what I do. So I've got 3 adult kids, Declan, who I stay with here in Limerick. So I've got 2 grandkids, Molly and Dan. And I've got my middle guy, Davy, is in Toronto. And my daughter, Louise, is school teaching in North Kerry, back in Kilmoily in North Kerry. So that's me in a nutshell. And yeah, so thanks for the opportunity, Paul, to introduce myself and my experience. And I've got, I suppose, qualifications. I've got an MBA and I've got my certification in coaching, executive coaching through Royal Roads.
Thanks, Fintan. So what we'll do is I'll sort of prompt you with a few questions just to tee up some of the thoughts that you put into your paper, to bring that to life for people. There might be people on the webinar who haven't had a chance to read the paper, so this will just be a chance for you to set out some of your ideas to them. Then we'll go into the breakout groups, and then we'll come back and give everyone a chance to ask you some questions. So, and the first one is, I think, is you've got a couple of scenarios I think you wanted to present to everybody. So why don't you sort of lay those out to us?
Yeah. So I suppose if you, first of all, think of your own credit union, but then think of a credit union where you're setting challenging goals, but you're setting those goals knowing that your team are going to consistently beat them. And they challenge themselves and they support one another to reach the goals. They're consistently putting you under pressure as their leader to move forward and get things done and find better ways to serve members, which is our purpose. When you go to the canteen, cafe, whatever you call it in your credit union, there's a buzz of excitement and people seem to be getting on well together. And there's a camaraderie in that team. So they love challenge. And your biggest challenge is not keeping them motivated. It's actually keeping up with them. So imagine that scenario in your credit union. Right? Now imagine a second scenario where work is just that. It's work. Your team are hard to motivate, and any mention of change frightens the living bejesus out of them. And they go into their shell and they resist. So you find it hard to move forward. And maybe you're beginning to think, well, the only thing I can do is merge with a bigger credit union because that's my only way out of this, really. I'm kind of stuck in a mire. And you see what needs to be done, but your staff kind of drain your energy because they don't seem motivated, and you find it very hard to do that, and they seem to be constantly negative. At this stage, you even stopped asking them for ideas because you know there's nothing going to come back. And even when you do hold a staff meeting, don't seem to be engaged. They're not asking any questions, and you kind of feel that it's a waste of time. So I suppose the question I ask you is, when you think of your own credit union environment, which are you closer to? And just this is a question for yourself in your own head. Are you closer to the richly engaged people where every day they're looking forward to a challenge? I won't say they're skipping into work, but they're happy to come into work and take on that challenge and get things done? Or are you at the other end of the spectrum where like it's drudgery? Or where are you in that, I suppose, where are you in that spectrum in terms of how close are you to either end? Because really that's all about culture. That is all about where are you in your culture journey, or even if you're on a journey. Because every organization has a culture. Sometimes we just don't know what that culture is because we're not intentional about it. And I think the whole purpose of the paper was, and it said, was to be intentional about your culture. Therefore, you can understand what your culture is, you can influence it, you can change it if it needs to be changed. But for you, what would your ideal culture environment be like? And would that very high-performing one, would it excite you? Or would it frighten you? Because sometimes we're actually more afraid of success than we are of failure. We're worried that, well, if I perform so well today, how am I going to match that tomorrow? How am I going to better it again? When in fact, in high-performing teams, and if you look at sports teams, for instance, they're always looking to go that step better. They get to a plateau, now we want to go to the next step. It's not about, oh, well, we want it, that's as good as we're going to get, because if you look at our credit union environment, there's lots of competition out there. Lots of new actors coming on the stage. And if we don't constantly up our game, then we'll leave ourselves open to start going backwards, even by just being as good as we are. So as I say, that's where culture fits in.
So, that's really interesting. There's challenges in there for leaders in a credit union context, I guess. And so, assuming that people want to pick up that challenge and wherever they are on that spectrum, look to go further, as you were suggesting.
Yeah.
Where do people start with that? How do they go about changing some or all of the culture there within?
So I think, first of all, if you're a leader, the important thing is to decide that you want to change, the culture that you're in, because it's very easy to sit there and, you know, the old story of the frog who sits in the warm water and the warm water heats up gently, and for the finish up, the frog boils because he doesn't move. Similarly, for a credit union, if we don't keep moving, if we don't keep growing, then, you know, we'll get eaten up. So the first thing is decide that you want to do something about culture and that you want to understand your culture better. In some cases, just pick one area and say, maybe it's communication, because whenever I do workshops, the two things that come back to me from anytime my experience, if you say, like, what do you need more of? And they'll say, more communication, more training. And then when you say, okay, well, communication is a two-way thing, what have you looked for? You're going to, oh, well, no, stop, don't be asking us that at all, like, you know. But if you start in one area like communication and say, okay, how would I like to communicate better with my staff? How would I like to find out their feelings and understand them? And start putting some kind of a plan around that. So create a plan and put some energy and imagination into that plan. Because part of the problem we have is that we say we're going to do something, we do it once, it doesn't work, and we go back into our shell. We say, okay, well, that didn't work. They don't want communication. Whereas in fact, it's about the consistency of what we do that makes the difference. So if we communicate this month, and yeah, we mightn't get a huge result, but we do the same thing next month, bit by bit, if people see that that's going to be a trend and a norm, then they'll get engaged. So really the first step is up to us. So be intentional and make sure everything you do shows that that's what you want to do. So when you're communicating, be engaged and be interested in it as if everybody is. And then find people in the organization that you think will respond. And use them as your guinea pigs or as your advocates to talk to other people to get involved in it. Because we all have teams, and sometimes members of teams dominate and they're not that interested, but other people might be very interested but just need the space to do it. So pick people around you that you think would support you in this journey towards, for instance, communication. Then communicate regularly and consistently, because you have to do it consistently, as I say. And then celebrate wins, no matter how small they are. Celebrate that win. If it is that you only get one bit of feedback, you get one question, celebrate that. Thank the person for it and make them feel that that was the right thing to do, rather than that they're the outlier. Run a values workshop. You know, we as Paul said in the introduction, we all have more or less the same values until we actually sit down and start talking about them. And when we do, we realize we are very close in value. It's funny, yesterday I did a workshop in a credit union in the Midlands, and because they had 70 staff, we did it in 2 parts. So the first half, in the morning, we did the workshop, we did the values, they came up with their 8 or 10 values. We did a workshop in the afternoon with the other half of the staff. They came up with their 8 or 10 values. And I would say of the 10 values, 8 of them were the same as the values in the morning. And when I showed them in the afternoon, they were saying, wow, yeah, we all have the same values. But actually even enunciating those values and talking about them got them so animated and so discussing that I think it's really important to do it, because it just shows people that we all have the same values. We're all here for the same reason and the same purpose. And sometimes we forget that because we're in our own silos. Well, I'm in accounts, it doesn't matter. I'm in marketing. Well, what has that got to do with it? You know, I'm working on the front line. So what does the values mean to me? And when you talk about it, it really brings them onto them. And when you do that, use that values and use that thing to create expectations, not just of yourself, but above your team. And then follow through with those expectations to find out what's happening with them. And don't expect change overnight, because it just takes a bit of time for people to get on your page, if you like. But you have to be very sure that you're on your page. Does that help, Nick? You're muted.
Apologies, didn't want to hear me blowing my nose. I think that was a great start, and I think that will give people a lot of food for thought going into the discussions later on. If those aren't already on their to-do list, then discussing how to make change will be those give you a list of things to start with. You're clearly very passionate about culture, and you alluded to this as something you've kind of focused on more recently in your career. So what are the reasons behind why you've got to the point of, you know, even writing a paper about culture and getting into this part of the focus as a professional?
Well, I guess through my professional career, I carried what I call, I suppose, my culture, which I considered was the culture of the credit union and the culture every place would have. But through my coaching, I realized that we all have different cultures. We all have different little nuances and sometimes bigger nuances of culture in our credit unions than what I would consider to be, you know, the norm, if you like. So writing the paper in a way was to show that, like, people can get frustrated working in credit unions because they see the value, they see the opportunity, and sometimes their credit union is holding them back. And their culture is holding them back, and they see what's going on. And, you know, through my coaching, I say, okay, well, you know, you can be an agent of change. And sometimes they're kind of frustrated, no, I can't. I can't do anything here. No, nothing's going to change, you know. So I do think it's really important for the leadership to understand that they can change and that everybody can change. So that was, I suppose, was to show the importance of culture. And I shared a short story in it that when I joined the credit union in Canada, I was interviewed on Facebook for all the staff to see me and be introduced to me. And I gave my, you know, bit of a spiff in that. And I said, look, I've got an open door culture. Anybody's got any ideas, feel free to come into my office. I'm up here in the office in Emerald Park, and I'd love to meet you. And that was it. And then I was downstairs in Emerald Park later on. I was talking to the staff down there, and this lady who'd been there a few years came up to me and said, Fintan, I really love what you said upstairs a while ago. I said, oh, thank you. I said, yeah, that's great. And she said, but that's not going to happen. And I said, what do you mean? Well, she said, we don't have any access to upstairs. So your door might be open, but I can't go in. And I said, wow, I didn't know that. So the first thing I did was we went back upstairs to our security officer, and I said to him, so what's the story with the access? And he said, oh yeah, the last CEO didn't want any people coming upstairs because we've got a lot of sensitive data up here. I said, all the sensitive data is downstairs. Our frontline staff have it. And then he kind of looked at me and said, yeah, you're probably right. I said, can we change that access code? You can do it now, he said. So I was able to go downstairs and effect that change straight away so that people could, and it's only a small thing, but it's those small actions that make a difference. So when we say something like, you can come up and talk to me, and people can't, but then you say, well, actually, no, you can. People say, okay, well, actually, he means what he says. It's just as a small change and a small example. So I suppose culture is so important because it's part of everything we do. You know, as you said, Paul, I mean, the definition of culture is it's the way we do things around here. It's the way we're expected to do things around here. It's also the atmosphere and the feeling that an organization gives you. And you get that very quickly. So if you walk into a shop, a restaurant, a bank, wherever, you get a feeling very quickly whether you're actually valued and wanted there or not. And in my workshops, I ask people for experiences that they've had in local places, and they're always able to come up with a place that, yeah, it was really nice when I went in there. And then in the other side of it, say, well, I'm never going back there again. Service was awful. I felt in the way. You know, so we have the opportunity in our credit unions to make our members welcome, but also to make our staff and our colleagues welcome, because sometimes we forget about that. We're all the time looking out over the counter, and we seldom look back in to see how we're treating ourselves. So I think that's important, and that's really so much part of the culture. I suppose the second thing that I wanted to show that culture has to be aligned with our values. And we said earlier on, our values are very much the same. But if they are, why isn't our culture all the same? And sometimes our culture, our values as we subscribe to them are one, and our culture is quite different. And I've experienced credit unions where I would say the culture has been toxic, where people were afraid of their supervisors, afraid of their bosses, afraid of their CEO in one case where I'd gone into. And I think, wow, that's not the culture I would like to see in an organization or where I'd be involved. So the fact that we're called a credit union and that we have similar values does not mean that we have the same culture. But I do think it's important for people to realize how valuable culture is. It's not something out there in airy-fairy. It's something that's very valuable to you. And, you know, and thirdly, I think, and this is where, in terms of the paper, I think this is where the real goal is. We can influence and we can change culture. And the paper is really to say to people that one, culture is important, but two, you do not have to accept the culture you have. If you see areas of difficulty or of challenge, you have the opportunity to change those. You have the opportunity, if you're intentional and consistent, you have the opportunity to change those cultures. And really it's about looking at, well, first of all, looking at yourself. Because if you're a leader, culture comes from the top. And I'll probably say it later on, I'll probably say it 3 or 4 times during this thing is, what we tolerate, we get. So if we tolerate poor behavior, we get poor behavior. If we tolerate tardiness and lateness in meetings, we get lateness in meetings. You know, so whatever we tolerate, that's what we actually get. We're a self-fulfilling prophecy in that area. And we can say we want people to be engaged, but if we're not engaged, they're not engaged. It's so much more about what you do than what you say when it comes to culture. But in practical ways, like, who do we recruit? Do we recruit people for attitude or for skills? People with the right attitude will quickly pick up the skills. People with the skills with the wrong attitude will never fit into your team. So it's about recruiting right. And when we recruit, do we talk about culture? When we put in an ad, are we just looking for a person to fill a vacancy? Are we looking for somebody who's going to be a real member of our team, aligned to our values, and actually wants to work for us? And that's hugely important, because if you like, if we can recruit properly and onboard properly, and you know, I say this in the workshop, and I've been part of this. Part of our onboarding normally is, so this is how you do a transaction. This is how you do a lodgement. This is how you do a withdrawal and take a loan application. Now sit beside Mary or John there for a week, and if you have any problems, ask them a question, they'll help you. And then we let them lose some members. We never talk about our history. We never talk about our expectations for our culture. We never talk about our expectations, how we're going to support them to be successful. But we expect them to be engaged and be part of our team and really ascribe to our values when we haven't even spoken about them. And I've done it. I've done it. I put my hand up and said that I've done it. I have employed people like that and just take them in. We need someone. We need someone to fill a position. Let's go and get them. So, and it's the same if you're a board of directors. How do you fill the vacancies in your board? Do you sell it like it's normally sold? Well, it's only an hour a month. Well, there's a great commitment. As opposed to what's the impact of your work? What's the value of your work? What's the impact of the credit union on your community? I think that's a much better sell than it's only an hour a month. I could go to the gym for an hour a month. It would seem like a long time, but I could do it. You know, so it's really about how do we sell it? You know, so it's recruitment, onboarding. When it comes to the end of their probation, do you sit them down and talk about the culture? Do you think about what you've observed while they've been there? Are they fitting in? Because if they're not fitting in, that's the cheapest fire you'll ever have, is to let somebody go because they don't fit into your culture at the end of their probation. Because once you actually employ them full-time, it's a lot harder to exit them. So making sure that they fit your culture. Do the people that you have currently fit your culture? That's another assessment you need to make. We'll talk about that in a second. But when you have meetings, you talk about culture. When you have correspondence with your staff, you talk about culture. When you have an annual review or a quarterly review, do you review how they're fitting into your culture? Or do you let that slide? Because that could be a difficult conversation, so we won't go there. So all of those areas are areas where you can influence your culture. But the other area, which is probably just as important, if not more important, is how do you react to events? And here I'll actually share a sporting story, because I think culture and sports fit very well together. And I'm going to talk about the Irish rugby team, so I apologize in advance to my British attendees today, but I'm going to talk about the Irish rugby team because they've been so successful over the last 2 or 3 years. And successful because they've got an Englishman in charge, so you're back in and included again. But an incident happened at the World Cup in October. One of the press conferences, our big lock, Tyburn, appeared at the press conference in a short 3-piece suit and tie. And the press said to him, like, why are you in a suit? Because everybody else is obviously in training gear and casual tops. And he said, it's a punishment. I was late for training. Now, it's a kind of a fun punishment. Although when I related the story to a credit union the other day, they said, isn't that bullying? And I said, no, it's not bullying. But yeah, and I wouldn't like to bully Tyburn. But anyway, but the point being, that's how you enforce culture. A more serious event happened when Ireland were playing New Zealand in the same tournament, and and the week of the game, World Cup quarterfinal, New Zealand dropped a guy from their panel. He had been on the 23 on the match squad for every panel. He was dropped for that one because of something he did. Now, we didn't get to hear what it was, whether he was late for training, whether he had said something, whether he did an altercation or something like that. It doesn't matter. What matters is they were willing to take that sanction and drop him from the panel for just to support their culture. And the All Blacks are very, very much into their culture. I read a book by James Kerr, who's a famous All Black, and it's called Legacy. And if you get a chance ever, if you have any interest in sport and any interest in business, the name of the book is Legacy. It's what business can learn from sport. But it's all about the culture in the All Blacks and all about how they built it and why it's important to them. And their culture is, we want to leave the team in a better place when we leave than when we come in. In most teams, it's how are we going to win the next game? So it's very much about creating that atmosphere and that culture around the team so that they're successful, rather than how are we going to win the next game. So that's really why it's important. So that was where I think I came from. And I suppose the 4th point to make was, because I love culture and I'm passionate about it, it's an opportunity for me to go out and meet people and further my career and talk about it and help people, I suppose, with it. So those were the reasons, I suppose, Paul or Nick, was behind writing this paper.
Great, and I think I'm really struck by what you said there, Fintan. And one of the things that occurs to me, and implicit in what you said, of course, is that there's a culture there, whether we do anything about it or not. So, you know, there's no vacuum here. There has to be a culture for the way things are done around here, and so why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't we want that to be a positive culture? A culture is actually going somewhere. It might not be. It might be a the culture we inherit might be one that's not necessarily a toxic one, but it might not be an energizing one. It might not be a developmental one. It might not be a change orientated one. So being deliberate about your culture, I think, really important, and particularly in a cooperative, in a values-based organization like ours. So I've got one more question for you before we go into a small group. So anyone out there who's finishing off their sandwiches, do that now. You've got about 5 minutes while Fintan answers this question before you have to talk to other people. Why are we having this conversation? Why is this time right now a good time to be having this conversation, do you think? Is there anything particular about where we all are at the moment that means this is a particularly good time to talk about culture?
Yeah, and just before I answer that, just to go back to your comment there about we having a culture, you know, it's quite possible that if you've got branches in your credit union, that you have numerous cultures, because your branch can have its own culture. And that might be very much dependent on either somebody who is in that branch for a long time, or somebody who has got a long personality or a big personality, because they will influence the culture in that branch. For good or bad, they'll influence the culture. So that's just to say, like, it doesn't have to be just one culture. There can be different cultures. And, you know, I also say that some organizations need to have different cultures. Whereas in a credit union, because we're small, one culture should be doing what it is, because we really have one purpose, and that is to give service to our members. That's our real purpose in being. So that's our why, if you like. Well, yeah, so you asked, why is this a good time, or why is it the right time to talk about culture? And I think there's a number of reasons for that. So first off, COVID-19. COVID-19, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, came into our lives, and it came in such a way that, you know, within weeks of being like, this is something that's going to happen in China, this is something that's not going to affect us, oh my God, it's in Italy, oh my God, and suddenly we're closed. So it brought us together in such a way that we banded together and we worked together because we had to get through it. People did jobs and kept places open and worked behind the scenes, or worked from home when they had to try and make sure that we kept the service going for our members. And that really brought the teams together. You know, it wasn't easy. I mean, we had never, thank God, lived through a pandemic like that before, and hopefully we'll never have to. But I think, you know, genuinely, and teams were very proud of the way they reacted when COVID hit, because we put the one thing we put first was member service. Now COVID has moved on a bit. It's still there, but not as a pandemic as we know it. But it has left its scars on us and on our teams. And what we find is people have, you know, retracted into themselves. They've got entrenched. They've got, oh, well, I was able to work from home during COVID. I should be able to work from home now. So you've got the people who are working from home. You've got the people who are hybrid. And then you've got the people who have to come into work because that's where the service is. And that in some ways is creating bits of friction between teams and between people. So I think it's really important now that COVID has passed, that we go back and say, okay, now let's how do we work in this new environment, whether that's remote, hybrid, or in the office? What culture is going to help us to get through that and make us stronger? So I think because of that this is a good time, you know, to talk about what our culture is and what it needs to be. The second thing is I think it's quite obvious, is the amount of mergers and transfers of engagement that have happened over the last, say, 5 years. And some of those through COVID, pre-COVID, and since COVID. So again, you're merging cultures, but what have we done about actually merging the culture, or understanding the culture that we now have, or the different cultures that we now have? Because there is this bit of, well, oh, well, that's the way they do it there, but this is the way we've always done it here. And that creates a a difference. So if a member walks into one office, they get one level of service. They walk into another office, they can get another level of service. And I presume that's not what we want. We want a level of service that's uniform across our organization and good. So we want to take the best of what's in each culture and actually bring it together. So mergers and transfers, I think, are really, bringing our cultures into the spotlight. Regulation has become a driver of culture. We should probably have never left it until it became a driver of culture. But I think it's because of the collapse in the financial industry in 2008, when the reports went back and looked at what happened. The main report said that it was due to a lack of culture and a culture of poor governance and a culture of not questioning. So where you had a CEO who was all powerful almost, and they dictated what happened, and everybody just said yes. And in the case of the banks, once the share price kept going up, everybody was happy. And the staff were pushing their pension funds and their bonuses into the share price, and the share price is going up, and everybody thought, wow, this is never going to end. And it did. But because they were all earning or winning from it, they weren't questioning what was going on. So the culture was poor. So now that the regulations are looking at culture, and they're looking at, so I mean, you've got different things. You've got the individual accountability framework in Ireland. You've got the consumer duty guidelines in England. You've got other guidelines in Canada, and they've all come out in the last 12, 18 months, where they've had a chance to sit down and look at culture and said, okay, something's got to change. So regulation is driving us towards that change in culture as well, or that understanding our culture, I'll say, because not everybody's got a poor culture. So it's about understanding that and saying, okay, well, it's COVID-19, it's mergers, transfers, and it's regulation. But the fourth thing I would add in is good culture is good for business. And that's where we should be starting from. So if we have a good culture, we've got good staff, working in a supported environment, giving great service to our members, future looking to get our, our members have more demands now than what they had 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. They want services, they want them quicker, they want them more convenient. I went to Canada in 2017. There was no such thing as Revolut in 2017. There are very few people in Ireland under the age of 25, I would say, who don't have a Revolut card in their pocket. So where has it come from in 7 years? Our credit unions are here 50, 60, 70 years. And yet this Revolut can come in and just go and basically pass us out as being the financial, provider of choice for our members. So what's good for business is good for us. So if our culture is good, we're supporting our staff, they're giving good service to members, they're forward looking, they're looking at technology, they're encouraging us and they're challenging us, if you like, to be better and to be serving our members. That's really good for our business. So there's no downside to good culture. It's a win-win-win, because you're winning, your employees are winning, your members are winning, and at the end of the day, your business is winning. So really, it's a win-win-win, as I said.
Brilliant. Well, that's a great sort of inspiration to jump into some conversations between people on the call. So we're going to drop you into some small groups. Paul's been working on getting people separated out so that they're not talking to people in their own credit union. So we're going to mix you up. We'd like you all to talk about, we've got some questions. I mean, you can talk about anything. You can talk about culture in a range of ways, but we thought it might be helpful to put some questions into the group so that you've got a starter for 10. And so our questions for you in your groups are, what one thing in your culture are you proud of at your credit union, to share that with the people in the room with you? If there was one thing you wanted to change, what would that be? And how might you go about making that change? So those are kind of 3 questions to kind of get you talking. And what we'd like is for somebody from each group at the end to feed back to us by saying what one thing that you've agreed that gets in the way of changing cultures. So, and Fintan's talked about lots of things you can do. So, what are the things that get in the way, and what's the thing that has worked for you? So, one thing that you've all either agreed or discussed is a thing that gets in the way, but a thing you can use to overcome that. So, if somebody can at the beginning or the end put their hand up to feedback to us all, and then after that we can get into more questions. You guys can ask questions directly of Fintan, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Welcome back, everybody. It turned out we had three groups, three discussion groups. I hope that the discussions were lively, interesting, and informative in the groups. Fintan, I know, was able to visit one of them. But now we're just going to, between now and 1:30, which is our hard stop, we're going to have the opportunity for questions and discussion, questions to Fintan. But before we open the open question and answer session, we just thought it'd be good to have a little bit of feedback from each group. So remember, we set just two little questions. The one thing that works in changing culture, we'll take it the other way around, the positive one first. The one thing that works in changing culture, and the one thing that gets away in changing culture. So the one thing that works and one thing that gets in the way. So could I just ask group one to share their ideas on those questions? And in group one, let me see who I'll have to. In group one, we had Aisling, Chris, Kira, and Dave. I'm not sure who's going to come back in on that one.
Just remember you're muted, so you'll have to unmute.
Yeah. I got volunteered.
All right.
And reluctantly, I must say. But so apologies for that. Listen, yeah, we had a really, really good discussion around the opportunities. I suppose in terms of we all mentioned like the thing that our culture is really that kind of that's our strong our connection to community, the member service, that we're generally seen as welcoming with probably good atmosphere. Kira mentioned around, and even for the payroll deduction, that one thing that really amplifies their culture is their use of Google reviews. Convenience of payroll. A lot of their members say the payroll deduction is a great offering. But they had an interesting question around whether the credit union itself is seen as a additional kind of a benefit of their employment, as opposed to just being a benefit in itself, which I thought was an interesting item for any kind of industrial credit union or payroll deduction credit union to consider. I think in terms of then Hoot Credit Union, Chris was saying there that their intimacy with has always been their strength, with their knowledge of the members. Their staff would know a lot of their members. Now that's changed over time, and the challenge then has become, because of remote and online working, and people are not tending to come into them as much as they used to. So how can you kind of preserve that, and kind of how can you maintain that kind of personal kind of awareness of your member and their individual circumstances? Unfortunately, Aisling's a camera wasn't working, or she was unable to mute, so she wasn't able to engage. But I think she was just listening in there. I think the challenges then would be around our that idea of increased use of online and remote kind of access. How do you maintain that connectivity? How do you keep on kind of pushing the idea that the credit union is different, and that our role is not just provider of transactions? And we kind of had different approaches out. I think like we here in the North, we have a conscious social kind of media kind of policy around how to amplify and engage and keep that going. But from Hoot's credit union's perspective, then they were faced with the issue. How do you do that? And one of the simple things that they're doing is just really, as people engage with them on the app, they're kind of just adding a simple, like little simple questions or little simple pointers or reminders to their members that they're different. So I thought it was really interesting that they were using their technology like that to say, listen, we're different here because, you know, and ask the simple questions like, you know, why are you a member why do we call you a member and not a customer? And they're kind of now moving to a stage where they're going to, you know, increase that kind of, you know, level of communication with their members in terms of amplifying their differences. So yeah, it was and then obviously with you know, Kira and Metro, then, you know, it's again, how do we you know, how do you kind of, because they are payroll deduction, but how do you constantly remind that? But the big thing is the convenience of payroll deduction in itself is a huge kind of differentiator for them, or a key selling point for them. So I think Metro are saying that they'll kind of continue to use that, and that kind of does set them apart. So kind of two cultures relatively similar there. One, you know, different points in their kind of relationship, and then one culture, you know, being the payroll has a little bit some nuances there. But overall, the message around, you know, the credit union sector is that, you know, we are different and that we need to maintain those and amplify those cultural differences.
Okay, thanks for that, Dave. That's really interesting. But it's really interesting there that you picked up on you know, the challenges and the changes to organizational culture in a digital world. That's really interesting, because I remember myself way back when we first got involved in credit union, we did tend to know everybody. And that was, of course, what kind of fed people's interest as well. The staff loved knowing people, you know, and getting to know people and their families and all sorts. But now it's changing. And maybe I'll come back to Fintan on that later after the feedback about, you know, culture in a digital world and some of the challenges that we face now that we're all online. But let's go to number two, group two. That was David, Declan, Karen, and Teresa. Is anybody who's the spokesperson there? We got a spokesperson from David, Declan.
I think is Karen coming in? Yeah,
I
you're
am
on
coming
mute.
in. Sorry, I wasn't officially voted, but I'm happy to step forward. It does help if I unmute myself though. We had just a general discussion about, you know, our own organisations and how we kind of got to where we are with our current cultures. I think one of the interesting things that both myself and David had done an exercise around getting the staff to, in terms of developing the current culture, in terms of getting the staff to be involved in that, so it being more of a bottom up approach. So at Just Credit Union, we did an exercise shortly after everyone came back into the office after COVID, and we realized that things had really fallen apart culturally, that we actually started right from the bottom, and we had this a massive staff exercise to revisit and re-identify all of our values, or the team and organizational values, and then those fed into expected behaviors, and those then feed into the kind of the expected, you know, the culture of the organization. And I think that worked really well. So you know, we have a very sort of specific values and behaviors, and those were developed by the team. I think what we're not so good at, and it perhaps gets in the way in terms of moving forward, and I think Therese mentioned this as well, was then kind of making sure that is reinforced going forward. So you know, whether that's in team meetings or one-to-ones or through the appraisal system, I find it much harder to constantly bring those back in, and I'm not very good at, I haven't yet found a way where that works particularly well. So I think that's one of the things that can get in the way of changing culture. Is it's not something, you know, it shouldn't be something that you do and park on a shelf. But sometimes I think for me anyway, in the day-to-day delivery of the business, it does kind of get a bit forgotten next to all the other things that need to be done. I don't know whether anybody else wants to add anything on that.
Nope. Okay. Well, thanks, Karen, for that feedback. We'll pick up on some of those later. So we'll move now to the third group, which is either Lynn or Ted.
Yes, I was nominated. So we had Lynn from the community credit union over in Liverpool, and we'd actually, was it two lanes? No, we had Lynn in the community credit union in Liverpool. We had Norma in the community credit union up in Dublin, and we had another lady that had a vacate there from Dundalk. I'm not forgetting her name, and she had only joined actually 5 or 6 weeks ago. But I suppose in relation to culture, what worked well, Lynn, probably both Lynn and Norma in the community credit unions, especially Lynn in Liverpool was mentioning that their culture change of inclusive culture, I suppose, including staff involved in certain decisions. And it wasn't that the question was asked, was it a new leader, a new supervisor, new manager that came into place and changed this culture for them? And she was saying, no, it is actually, the CEO or somebody high up basically, was reading, got involved in a lot of research on culture and actually implemented what she actually read. And that was a big change and a nice thing to hear, actually, to be honest with you, in the sense that we can all do the reading on it and we're all guilty of it, but actually putting it into place is a bit harder, So that was, the inclusive nature of actually getting people involved in decision making. I suppose from our perspective, Clada Credit Union, culture that we were kind of, be happy with would be the customer service that we offer at the moment, or have been offering. We do seem to do well on that, and I suppose we would have had that, but I suppose we brought in did a lean culture, and we did a customer service excellent culture, and they've both worked very well. But it was around communicating within various different departments, and we do a thing without boring you to death on this, but we do a thing, a 10-minute huddle on a Monday and a Friday, and we have various different departments have kind of like a slot on the notice board, and there's call outs and thank yous and what's worked, what didn't work, and ideas, and management look at the ideas and get back to people on what worked, whether we put it into place or not put it into place. So there's a bigger, I could talk for a lot longer, but I'll just leave it at that. In relation to what would we like to change in culture around the place, I think we were all kind of the same boat in the sense that, now listen, while we have a culture or I talked about a huddle, and each department would have a section on it, and we come together. The reality of it on a day-to-day basis is that, we're all guilty of that, that if we're responsible for operations or responsible for lending, that we get stuck into lending, and, that's our focus. And, it's about lifting the head and seeing, what's the other departments doing, and, that is coordinated. Now listen, somebody could say, listen, that's the responsibility of the CEO or deputy CEO, and it is to an extent. But equally that, people within those departments, have a certain responsibility to know what's going on in the other department. Because if one department is totally chock-a-block or traffic jam, as we talk about, it's going to feed, or it's not going to feed into another department. And so, what you're trying to implement can work well in one department, but if the other departments aren't ready for you, it's not going to work.
Good. Thanks very much, Ted, for those ideas, thoughts, and reflections from the group. Maybe I could just pass over to Fintan now. Is there anything that anybody said from the groups that you'd like to pick up on, reinforce, comment on, Fintan? You're muted as well.
Yeah, I think, in terms of, I can totally associate with what Karen said in relation to, like, we've done the work in culture, and even what Ted said there, like, the problem is the business of the day gets in the way, and we kind of put it to one side. And sometimes it's maybe because we bite off a big chunk rather than a small bit. And I think culture it's about three things: the clarity. So do people understand what we're trying to do? And then the second thing is communication. Have we told them enough and in enough ways what we're trying to do? And the third and the most vital one is consistency. So it's the three C's, really. but the consistency is really important, because that's what our staff are looking for. They're looking for that direction. They're looking for that consistency. And, you know, even Ted, you said having the huddle on the Monday and the Friday, once that keeps happening, they know it's going to happen. So it's what you put into that, and how do you reinforce that? And, you know, is a lot of, I suppose, you're right in terms that it is the role of the CEO or deputy CEO to make sure that the groups are working together and finding ways that they can work together. And it's interesting when you said that, I think it was Lynn's team where they changed the culture. The CEO decided to change the culture, and it was changed. That's how easy or difficult it is to do it, because if you're intentional about it, you can do it. You know, or we can let stuff get in the way of it. But I do think like that even that sharing alone, that the CEO was able to change culture by just saying, okay, I've read something, I think we should do this. Let's do it.
Great. And the other issue that came up, and maybe it's significant or not significant, but just a thought, Fintan, on, you know, the more that particularly community credit unions and others are becoming increasingly digitalized. You know, the actual working environment is changing from actually speaking to people to apps and internet. What do you think digitalization has any particular effect on culture? And if so, what has it got any relevance to all of this?
I think it is huge relevance in probably two ways. One is how we interact with members.
Yeah.
Because I mean, our main purpose as credit unions is to serve our members. So the first question I would ask is, you know, are we using that technology, or are we, you know, staying current in the technology so members can use that? And the second question, you know, is are we using it? And I was sitting in Chris's group there for a while, and she was talking about how they use their app, and Dave spoke about it, how they use their app to actually to connect with members and to ask them small questions, and just to say, oh, we're not, you know, we're different, and this is why we're different, you know. So using the technology. But the other thing I would say is, in terms of a business, there's two sides of it. In terms of a business, we were always very reliant on people coming in the door, and that was our culture. We loved it. We love the face-to-face interaction. We love that kind of thing. But the problem is, it's been drifting away from us for the last, you know, 5-6 years. Even before COVID, it's been drifting away. But we were always leaving it go. Whereas I think we have to take control of that and say, okay, well, how do we want that interaction to look now? How do we want our app to be different? How do we want our service to be different? And how do we get it to reflect the fact, and as Dave said earlier on, like that we're a cooperative. We're not here for profit. But obviously we have to make a profit, because we've got to invest in that technology. But I think more importantly is, how do we keep our team together inside? Because technology only works by the people behind it. So how do we keep our team, you know, interactive, engaged, and wanting to create that environment for members? When you've got people who are maybe, you know, and I think in Kira's situation, like, people aren't even in the office. They're working from home on a phone. So it's very convenient for people, but how do we then change our internal systems and structures so that we can socialize? And it might be that, you know, once every 2 weeks we have a huddle on Zoom, but it's not about work. It's about what's going on in your life. What are you doing this weekend? The things that you would normally have the conversation about on a Monday before you start a meeting if you were in person. So what you do this weekend? Oh, I was at a game. Yeah, Liverpool won. Oh, whatever. How did that go? Like, you know. But having a Zoom meeting about nothing, but just about what are you doing? What's happening in your life? What's exciting you now? And we kind of lost that.
Yeah, good.
So,
Thanks, Fintan. Thanks. We have a little bit time left for questions. So questions will have to be brief, and Fintan replies will have to be even briefer. So if there's anybody got a question, maybe they could use the reaction button to put the hand up, raise hand, or just come in. Actually, it doesn't.
Yeah,
we're a small enough group of people just to come in.
yeah. If you don't mind, just
Yeah.
it's kind of, it was mentioned in the group, you know, like I suppose, listen, you know, from you know, in the past, you know, a credit union is all about savings and lending, and you know, and even still, you know, there's a high emphasis on lending, and one of the ladies was mentioning, you know, that you know, lending was seen as the golden group of a credit union, which there probably isn't a lot of credit unions, and you don't like to, you know, people wouldn't like to admit that, and you have to find ways of you know, obviously you know, working with the people in the front counter in relation to new membership and all those kind of things, you know. So, you know, sometimes you can credit unions could fall into the whole, you know, lending is all about lending, and then the other ones maybe feel a little bit excluded, you know. But the other side of things is when we're talking about you know, the technology, you know, that's a big culture change at the moment. I'm not saying it's a problem with us, you know, at the moment, but you know, years ago, you know, people knew everything about lending, knew everything about, you know, savings and the products and services. Now we have so many products and services, you know, some staff may struggle in knowing a lot about the service that we offer. Equally, you know, what can sometimes happen is, you know, the people that's really good at the technology and the offline, they end up doing the majority of the work. And there's a bit of resentment on both sides, a bit of resentment of the person that's good at it because they're saying, listen, I'm doing all this work and you don't even know how much I'm doing. And the other side is, oh, look at that person's getting all that work. They're, you know, he's the golden boy or she's the golden girl, you know, this kind of things. So that, you know, that's a culture that's tricky at the moment with a lot of credit unions, I think.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Ted. Have you a quick comment, Fintan? Because we've got at least one more question to bring in before we close.
I suppose it's just about recognizing it and working with it. Really, I think you know, there's no golden bullet for that. It's about how do you engage people and how do you work with it.
Yeah,
good. Can I bring David? Where's David?
Yeah, no, Fintan. Just an observation. How you doing, Fintan? You well?
I'm great.
So it's just an observation on the All Blacks, and I suppose being a sporting person myself, I suppose South Africa winning the World Cup, and I would have associated probably all of the culture that the New Zealand team had, South Africa had, but the purpose really rang through from the South Africans about why, the compelling reason why, and that was they're the South African people,
yep.
and what they've been through. So just you know, and that's our. What I'd like to see is the compelling reason why, and it's the membership in the community that credit union exists for. So just an observation, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I totally agree with you there. And I think I suppose the point is most teams that are successful, most groups are successful, have a very good vision or a very good why, and that's what bands them together and makes them so powerful. You have teams who'll get up for 1 year, they'll win, and then they're gone. But you have the team that comes up and stays on top, and that's because their culture is about learning and building and building. So I think, yeah, great observation.
Good. We're coming now to the end of our session. We've only a few minutes left. So I'll just pass over to Fintan once again, just to wrap up very quickly. Then I'll pass over to Nick to do the thank yous and, you know, next steps and anything about Swoboda. So just very briefly, Fintan.
Very briefly, all I'll say to you is culture can be changed. Be intentional about it and guard it. Guard it like you would a garden, which means when you put some new plants in, make sure they thrive. And if there's weeds in the garden, pull them as quick as you can.
Good. Thanks. And over to Nick to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Fintan, and thanks all of you for interacting and sharing with each other. That is definitely you know, as valuable as bringing Fintan and his wise words into our discussion. It's the sharing, I think, is really good. So we will release this as a video. We'll tidy it up a bit and release this as a video so that you can go back through it if there's anything you wanted to re-look at, and so that other members can look at it as well. Other things that just really quickly, other things are going on. Look out, next week we'll be sending out the invitations to register for our conference in Dublin on the 24th of May, and the leadership dinner the night before. The theme will be collaboration. Big theme in Ireland in practice, and kind of still, I'd say, a little bit of a talk rather than doing in Britain, but maybe my colleagues would disagree. Some British colleagues would disagree with me on that. But for both, all credit union movements collaborating together, working out how that works is really important, and we want to focus on I think we're all agreed it's a good idea. So how do we actually do it? And that's what the theme of the conference will be about. We've got a couple of other papers in the pipeline, but I won't go into the detail on that. But the other thing to say is that we are spending quite a lot of time thinking about what membership of Swoboda looks like at the moment, and we're going to refresh the membership packages that you currently subscribe to, targeting launching that in April. And that will involve putting a paywall in so that people who aren't members of Swoboda and want to get hold of our research will have to pay for it, but you as members will get it for free. And the reason we're doing that is partly to give you a strong sense of the value you get from Swoboda membership, but really because we want lots more credit unions to join, because we're currently constrained because it's just me and Paul, and we're kind of getting to the limits of what we can physically do. So we need some more resource to do more work for you and have a greater impact. And we'll be quite keen for you to recommend a friend to drag people along to our events or get them involved. So look out for more news on that. So I've overrun by a minute. So really sorry for that. Thanks ever so much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you again at a Swoboda event or conference.